My name is Sylvain Cognet-Dauphin, and I'll be happy to share this session about perhaps the most exciting technology or the technology that has generated the most buzz for power generation over the past 2 to 3 years. We went from closures, retirements, to discussions about uprates, lifetime extensions, in some cases even new build. There are fantastic news every day about nuclear. We had some great news yesterday. Thank you, Sama. Other news earlier in the week, I think from Chris as well. So today I want to talk about that, but also want to talk about the challenges faced by the nuclear industry. So I'm extremely pleased to be joined by 4 leaders in the industry, starting with Kathleen Barrón, who is Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy and Growth Officer at Constellation. Sama Bilbao y Leon, who's Director General at the World Nuclear Association. Clay Sale, who's the CEO of X Energy. And Chris Levesque, who's President and CEO at TerraPower. Over the next 40 minutes, we're going to have fantastic discussions to talk about these announcements and understand what's the future for nuclear. The first theme I want to approach is basically what has enabled that massive excitement about nuclear. And I'm going to start with you, Kathleen. You've gone from closing plants to restarting them. How do you feel?
Never better. This is certainly different than when I came into this company 15 years ago, and we were sort of seeing declining and flat power prices as a result of fracking and integration of resources that have zero marginal cost, so they tend to have a depressive effect on prices. And we were trying to find ways to prevent those closures, including by reaching out to corporate customers, finding other sources of the use of the output, as in creating hydrogen. We went through this whole list of potential other opportunities and didn't find any. And so that's what led to the period when there was 13 reactors that shut down in the last 10 years, including our station in Pennsylvania, 3 Mile Island Unit 1. But we were close to shutting down a couple of dual unit sites as well, about 9 hours away before the state of Illinois stepped in to prevent that from happening in 2021. So we're much happier today to see the renewed appreciation for both the reliability and emissions-free attributes of nuclear, the sort of tight level of support for the technology from both sides of the aisle. You know, different technologies tend to have a widely disparate favorability score, depending on whether you're on the left or the right, but nuclear has support from both sides of the aisle, and I think that has led to supportive policies at the federal level and, importantly, an interest from corporate buyers in including nuclear within their voluntary procurements.
So, and that's a great point, which is that the market's really changed in recent years. The mood's changed. And Clay, one of the big things we heard about is the emergence of users. They're getting in the game. And you have deals with users. Can you tell more about these deals?
Well, we have 2 announced customers. We're working with Dow in a public-private partnership with the Department of Energy to deliver a plant that will produce both steam and electricity for their Seadrift ethylene plant 2 hours southwest of Houston. So a really exciting entrance into the process heat, combined heat and power market. And then we have a second announcement that we've made with the utility Energy Northwest, who has partnered with Amazon to deliver a 12-unit plant in Washington State. I think it's interesting and representative of the future that 2 non-traditional players in nuclear are leading in the United States, and you know, they have unique needs. They have the balance sheets. They have the expertise in building large, complex mega projects. And they are playing for an extraordinary economic prize that gives them a different calculus and a different approach to the risk of new nuclear than we've seen from the more traditional players. So it's a really exciting time.
What I think, which is very interesting, and perhaps continuing with you, it's what's specific about your technology which is attracting some of these buyers.
Well, we're a Generation 4 technology, and so that has some pluses, it has some negatives. The negative is we have to create a larger portion of the fuel supply chain, so we don't get to leverage the existing fuel supply chain. So this is our fuel form, it's a triso pebble. It has uranium enriched to 15.5%. Chris also uses HALEU enrichment, so he and I both need new sources of enrichment in the United States, in Europe, and around the world. We then fabricate that into a pebble that is composed of ceramic and graphite. So we need new graphite sources, here in the United States. And this technology results in a reactor that is intrinsically safe. It is meltdown proof. And when you start with a reactor that is meltdown proof, it changes completely the way you think about how you're going to build it, how you're going to deploy it, the simplicity of the system. It goes a long way in reducing the risk around construction execution, which is the primary, which has been the Achilles heel of new nuclear for the last 40 years. And our safety case also allows us to have a very small footprint. This ceramic fuel allows for very high steam temperatures. And so a small footprint combined with high steam temperatures, combined with the reliability that you get from 4 units, made us a very attractive option for Dow at their Seadrift site because they need incredibly reliable steam and power. And those same reliability considerations made us also attractive to Amazon as they were thinking about which technology they wanted to go with to power the dramatic growth in data centers that they project over the next couple of decades.
Thank you, Clay. And now shifting to Chris. So you talked about, Clay, the critical role of the government, and Chris, it's also important for you.
Sure. And Clay and I have been running the same gauntlet here. We're both real believers that part of solving this hesitancy to move into new builds and developed economies is that new build CapEx, right? We're all seeing that nuclear is very valued. If you look at the announcements of the last year, and congrats, Sama, another tripling announcement this week from some new players, you can see that nuclear energy is so valued today with many power purchase agreements for the hyperscalers, several companies going public. But you also see that what most of the announcements are framed around is announcements around nuclear capacity that was already built and amortized on someone else's back, all right? And the hard thing that we're all trying to solve is how to structure those first projects. So we all have amazing technologies. It begins with that. In our case, our natrium plant will be much cheaper than today's light water reactors because it's a low pressure plant. That means our vessels, our civil structures are all much lighter. We also have built-in energy storage, which means we can surge and sell our electricity when it's most valuable. So, economics is 2 things. It's about cost and value. Moving to a new technology means, we're better on both counts. So a lot of times technology is the simpler things to figure out today. It's the structure of these first projects. So, one thing we learned in watching some recent project failures, honestly, was there were good companies, good technologies who tried to move their first projects forward totally on the back of regional ratepayers. It doesn't work. We saw several projects canceled because of that. Not only did those projects not move forward because they were trying to get regional ratepayers in one part of the U.S. to cover those first-of-a-kind costs, those pre-learning curve costs. The other reason that doesn't make sense is all those ratepayers should be paying for is the value of the electricity. They shouldn't be funding that first investment. So the structure we've pursued, and it's really enabled by our strong private investors like Bill Gates and our Korean investors, and the U.S. Department of Energy. Both Clay at X-Energy, TerraPower, and I were fortunate to have received the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program grant. So if you think about these first projects, right, there's 3 sources of money. One is the off-takers, right? And we can't really expect those off-takers to handle what should be a technology investment, what should be a sovereign investment. We're taking an approach where our private investors, who are very patient investors, are helping us move forward with our project at record pace. Yesterday I was with the chairman of the NRC, where we celebrated being 2 months ahead of schedule on our construction license, which that never happens, right? We're ahead of schedule with the regulator. So it's great to have that private investment support that's letting us move so fast, because part of addressing these new build concerns, which in the free world, okay, in Europe, in the US, in every place except the UAE, where they have a great experience with Baraka, people are watching to see, can you move forward? Can you hit your milestones? And in that example with the NRC, we're showing we can retire that regulatory risk early on. And just coming back to the role of the government, we're not going to be able to expect the ratepayers or even some of the super rich off-takers to cover the whole bill. This is a sovereign investment. This is about reinvigorating U.S. technology, which we'd like to bring to Europe too, right, Clay? And that's what's going to help us kind of catch up with China and Russia, who are already pursuing sodium reactors, high-temperature gas reactors, molten salt reactors. Yeah. So there's certainly a role for the government there too.
So going back, so you talk about the government, we'll get back to that, but looking at basically the role of large corporates. So Sama, can you talk about what happened yesterday?
Yes, well, we had a big announcement yesterday. Many of you were there celebrating with us. We have many of the largest energy demand companies, including Google, Amazon, Meta, Dow Chemical, several others, recognizing the essential role of nuclear and the need to triple global nuclear capacity by 2050. So that was very significant, because these off-takers, these are industries, companies that recognize the essential value of 24/7 clean, affordable energy. And of course, they join, 31 countries in most continents that also support this goal. They join 14 major global banks and financial institutions that also support this goal of tripling global nuclear capacity. And of course, the nuclear industry, who is committed to actually deliver on those pledges. So very exciting. And again, this is a little bit what we are hearing here, right? That there is now many drivers that are pointing out to the essential value of nuclear to promote, of course, energy security, to promote sustainability, but also very importantly, access, affordability, competitiveness for providing this 24/7 energy that we need for development and growth. So very exciting.
Yeah, and some of the arguments, we talk a lot here about what's taking place in the US, and Chris, you alluded to developments in Europe, and we also had a lot of great news from Europe. Can you?
Yeah, no. So these days it's difficult to keep up with all the announcements, right? So we had fabulous announcements in the US going on almost every week, and it's similar in Europe, as you know. I mean, not only in Europe, very much everywhere in the world. I was in India, I think it was 3 weeks ago, when in fact it was Prime Minister Modi and the Minister of Energy announcing 100 gigawatts of new nuclear by 2047. So 2047 looks like a very weird date, but it isn't. It's their 100th anniversary of their independence, so it's 100 gigawatts, 100 years, so it's very cool. But they have intermediate steps, so they have 22 gigawatts by 2032, I believe. So that's in India. But in Europe, so obviously Sweden is moving very, very quickly. They plan to have 2 new reactors, 2 new large reactors by 2035. Czech Republic is already moving forward with their new reactors. Also, Romania is, again, very exciting construction for refurbishment, one reactor and 2 new CANDU reactors. Bulgaria, Poland, super exciting. We have a newcomer country that has enormous ambitions to replace their coal fleet with a nuclear fleet. So Hungary, 2 reactors under construction. I know I'm forgetting a bunch of them, but think about this. Bangladesh, we are expecting their first reactor to start operating 2025. Turkey are going to start operating their first reactor 2025. Egypt is coming maybe a couple of years behind. So, and I know I'm forgetting a bunch of stuff, but I think that you get the idea that much is happening. And all of these things are real. So that's very exciting.
This is great. It sounds easy.
Sorry?
It sounds easy, but it's not. So this is why Kathleen, upgrades and extensions and resorts, all known technology, but are they really easy projects?
Well, they're not hard. You mentioned the restart, and that's referring to our plant in Pennsylvania, formerly known as 3 Mile Island, that we're renaming after Chris Crane, our former CEO, passed away. And that is essentially a large refuel outage. It will take a number of years, and it will cost $1.6 billion. But we do think that's a doable effort, and everything is on track, in fact, ahead of schedule. Congrats, Chris, on your construction loan schedule. But likewise, the uprates. We in the competitive markets haven't done what some of the regulators have done to uprate their stations over the years, given the pressures in the competitive markets, which means we have about 1,000 megawatts across our fleet that we could add on the existing infrastructure, far less than obviously adding a new reactor. But that adds up to essentially, a whole new reactor across the fleet of new megawatts that could come on in this decade. And then the big game changer is license extensions. All of our fleet, per the NRC, could run to 80 years of operation, which takes it well past mid-century. And that's an enormous amount of emissions-free energy, obviously, to the extent that we can do that across the entire fleet, and maintain the sort of base load of energy that we rely on every day, 20% of electricity coming from the existing fleet. But more importantly, providing that base load of infrastructure, supply chain, and people, so that we can be the foundation for the new reactors to build on and come on as quickly as they can. A little bit jealous about all those developments in Europe, and we really need to see that happen here.
Okay, thank you. Going back to Clay, so when we build new reactors, we think about, we build a first of a kind, it's going to be expensive, and then we move to the nth of a kind, and it's going to be, well, a lot more competitive. You've got already a few deals. Do you have a perspective for how many deals we need to make to basically to get to that? Or, how do we get to nth of a kind cost?
The most important thing that we have to do to get to an nth of a kind cost is not just get the first ones built, but get the supply chain, the workforce, the constructors up, running, exercised, and competitive. Mm-hmm. And that is going to take a number of units. Is it 10 XE100s? It's probably more than that. Is it 40? It's probably less than that. But the great news for us is just in the 2 customers that we have announced, it's over 5 gigawatts of projects. And the opportunity to work even with a customer like Amazon, who has set a target of 5 gigawatts in the next 15 years. Mm-hmm. The opportunity to work with one customer across just a few number of sites on one design gives us the greatest opportunity to get to an nth of a kind cost as quickly as possible. Our industry has dreamed of this opportunity for 40 years. And it's like, let's get 5 utilities and 5 different PUCs to all combine and share risk and pick one technology, which is a great idea that comes out of the policy salons in Washington, but it's completely impossible to implement. But with one buyer, with one investor, with one technology across 3 sites, we might actually get it done. Mm-hmm. That's the opportunity that we have with Amazon. So I think the constraint on our ability to do that will be the corresponding investments that have to be made and have to be inspired by us and our customers into the supply chain to get the throughput that will be required. Now, the tariff regime overhangs all of that because the global nuclear supply chain is exactly that. There is no US-based, strictly nuclear supply chain for the commercial sector. That's the negative news. We're going to have to manage through the tariff risks. The positive news is, in order to get to the scale that we're seeking to achieve, I almost turned over your water with all my hand waving. In order to get to the scale that we seek to achieve, we're going to have to build a lot of new capacity. And what an extraordinary opportunity for this administration, for Secretary Wright, with the vision that he's laid out, to put in place the policies, to make available the government resources that will allow us to rebuild the supply chain for the next nuclear build-out right here in the United States. But that's going to be the constraint.
I mean, and if I may, this vision is exactly, synergistic with this goal of tripling global nuclear capacity by 2050. I mean, that number that to many of you may sound super ambitious, I mean, triple, oh my gosh, is nothing more than maintaining 10% of the global nuclear electricity. I'm not even looking at heat, cogeneration, district heating, desalination, hydrogen, no, just electricity. So this super ambitious goal is more or less maintaining the current contribution of nuclear energy to the grid. So if you think about that, that is 40 gigawatts of new capacity globally, not just in the US, globally, every year for the next 25 years. Think about that. 40 gigawatts per year for 25 years. Just so you have an idea, right now, for the last maybe 10, 15 years, we are building, in a good year, 8 gigawatts of new capacity, mostly in China, mostly by our Russian colleagues. India have been leading, Korea have been leading. So I mean, we really need to catch up. And this is where this global opportunity to rebuild supply chains, as Clay says, is going to be essential.
And about the supply chain, I mean, Chris, you've
Yes.
got news on that.
Yes, we certainly do. And, maybe I'll just cover why this is so important also when you're talking about getting to an acceptable nth-of-a-kind cost. President Trump's executive order on energy dominance mentioned two sources of energy, natural gas and nuclear, which we were really pleased to see. Mm-hmm. Natural gas in the US is super affordable. That's our competition. So for nuclear to compete with gas, we need to have parity with those costs. So that's a big reason why we need to move to advanced technologies, plants that are cheaper to build. And then as Clay described well, that first plant needs to have less steel, less concrete, fewer systems, but then we need to come down that nth-of-a-kind curve. So the market really needs to see two things. They need to see the speed, but also the capacity buildup, right? We're going to deliver our first plant in 2030, and then if we just kept going at one per year, that's not enough. Over the course of the 2030s, we need to show that we'll double capacity 3 times. We need to get to 10 or more plants per year by the end of the 2030s. So, the announcement we had earlier this year with our investor, HD Hyundai, who runs a shipyard in Korea with 70,000 employees. We've been talking to them for quite a while, at chairman level even, and they said to us, look, we build 100 or more ships a year. In nuclear energy, you do everything one at a time. Let us help you, and that's what we're doing with HD Hyundai. They're investing in us, and earlier this week, we announced an agreement that was witnessed by our chairman Bill Gates and Vice Chairman Chung at HD Hyundai, where we committed to invest in the tooling, the manufacturing capacity, to not just deliver that first reactor vessel on time for the 2030 startup, but to scale up to 10 or more natrium units per year by the end of the decade.
So I'm going back, so Sama, are there any, supply chain, we need to rebuild that. Are there lessons from other regions that we could learn?
Yeah, I think that I would say that, the point is exactly this. Let's go from projects to actual programs. So we have many countries, or a few countries, that have developed over time this capability. So I would say that definitely China has been doing a very good job. They have developed these capabilities, and Korea has been developing these capabilities. So I think that those are very good examples that we need to take in North America, that we need to take in Europe already. So I think that But again, so we are, as I was saying before, in Europe already there is plans to go towards these fleets of reactors. So I failed to mention, for example, France, that they are moving towards fleets of 8 reactors in the next few years. So going to full programs is helping accelerate and reveal these capabilities. And what I would say is one of the key pieces here is to have this long-term visibility commitment, if you wish, from policymakers, which we are starting to see in many countries and many regions, because that allows, first of all, the finance community, that allows the large energy users, and of course, the nuclear industry to actually, know that there's a future and invest in ourselves and put in place these investments in recreating the industrial infrastructure, the workforce that we need.
I wanted to follow on that, Kathleen, because the workforce, you talked about it. Can you elaborate on that also?
I mean, we have 78,000 professionals working in nuclear today in the US. And so that, as I mentioned, sort of a strong base of training that we do, aided by the US military. Of course, many of our workers come from the Navy nuclear program. But we employ thousands and thousands of skilled workers across the trades who come in every 2 years or so to help us refuel the plants and do maintenance. So that's just one of the many reasons we think, continuing to invest in the existing fleet is an important sort of stepping stone to building out the new reactor designs as they, come to market. On that front, I do think it's worth mentioning that, when you think about where you'd want to put some of the new reactors, we really do think that on the footprint of the existing sites is another, is an ideal place to think about siting new reactors, not just because we already have, in most cases, hundreds and hundreds of acres of land and a buffer to the community, but we have water, we have rail, we have done the seismic work, we have security, and we do have a tremendous amount of community support. I mean, if you want to find like the most zealot nuclear people other than, you guys who showed up for this, come to one of our plants. I mean, these machines are the investment agent of these communities. We fund, the tax base to a significant degree. Many of them work in the plants. These are 6-figure jobs, and usually multiple people in a family will work at the site over the years. And so I think they'd be most welcoming of a lot of communities in the US to new reactor development. So we think that's sort of another way we can contribute, by hosting one of these designs to making the next generation of nuclear happen.
And following with you, Kathleen, so let's think about some of the other points we had about basically policy support. And in your case, you've been observing a bit some U-turns from governments about siting new builds. Can you elaborate on that?
Say that again?
Sorry, from the facts that you've observed some U-turns from policymakers on nuclear in recent months about siting new build.
I'm sorry. I was sort of trying to trigger what you're asking me about, which I think you're asking me about both at the federal level, which I think we've talked about already, but also in the states. Yep. We've seen some really aggressive bills, including down here in Texas, but also in Maryland and in other places, with states saying, this is a technology I want to have as part of my portfolio, and taking some steps to figure out ways that the state governments, to Chris's point, as a sovereign can help with some of those development costs, or potentially as an off-taker. And we were very happy to have the state of New York join with us in a grant application to the DOE for an early site permit at our 9 Mile Point station in upstate. Again, it's an ideal place to think about putting a new reactor, but having the state go in with us, essentially a co-applicant to the DOE for funding for that site work, very exciting, and that's something that we would have expected to see just a few years ago.
Perhaps going back to Chris about that, can you tell us about your project in Wyoming and why you selected that place?
Sure. We've been working in Wyoming for over 4 years now. It was about 4.5 years ago when X-Energy and TerraPower both won these really significant government grants from the Department of Energy. And at that time, we had several potential sites in mind, but we hadn't chosen one. And in our case, we started to talk to Berkshire Hathaway Energy and PacifiCorp about locations. And it turns out in that region, which has been really powering the rich West Coast for decades, right? West Virginia on the East Coast, and then the mountain region on the West Coast have really been powering our rich coastal economies. But they were seeing aging coal plants there. And in one particular region where we decided to build, Lincoln County, Wyoming, that's where we're building the Camera Unit 1 reference plant. We're building it just down the road from a retiring coal plant that will it's over 60 years old. It's converting to gas, but it will need to shut down in the 2030s. And also in that community, there's a coal mine that is closing. So it's a community that's really at risk economically. So aside from providing the much needed energy, emission-free energy, the whole economic development impact, I think, of that is really an important part of what drew us to Wyoming. Great regulatory support there. We actually were able to get the Wyoming Industrial Siting Council to agree that they were the regulator for about 2/3 of our plant footprint. It used to be the NRC would control everything on the plant site. 2/3 of our plant footprint will be regulated by the state of Wyoming, who already granted us construction approval for 2/3 of the plant footprint that will start now. We're going to be using that coal community, that very energy literate coal community, to staff our plant. We plan to build multiple plants in Wyoming and Utah. And we're also going to be able to take advantage of the great transmission and cooling water that coal plants have today, right? So those, you might think the nuclear things are limiting. Often in our business, things like interconnect and more cooling water are going to be super limiting for nuclear development.
Okay, thank you.
So if I may add, because I think that this is very important, because we've talked about the challenges that we are facing, not just in nuclear, I think in energy in general, to really power workforce-wise this large energy demand that we are going to need to face. So I think that we just saw a great opportunity, and maybe Chris, you want to elaborate. So I think that it's important to notice that in nuclear, yes, we do need many nuclear engineers, but we need many other specialties, many of which are quite cross-related from other technologies, as could be coal. So there's enormous opportunities to reskill and to put perhaps not just nuclear workforce plans, but clean energy workforce plans to actually cross-pollinate the skills and the talents of all these different energy communities. And I know that this is something that you guys are doing. I don't know whether you want to talk more about that.
Workforce is key. I serve on the Secretary of Energy's Workforce Advisory Board. This is seen as a national security challenge because a lot of us are in a generation from maybe our parents didn't go to college, but they wanted us to go to college, and that's what we want for our kids. But we need more people in the trades. I've had multiple governors and presidents of state universities ask me, how do we encourage more nuclear? We'll do more PhD programs for you. And I'm like, no, we need PhDs, don't get me wrong, but where we need an increase in investment is bachelor's degrees and associate's degrees at community colleges, because those will be our welders, our pipe fitters, our HVAC technicians. That's where to focus on the workforce.
So workforce and supply chain are two uncertainties. In some cases, there's also another challenge that needs to be overcome, which is the economics of nuclear, especially in the wholesale market. So, Kathleen, can you elaborate on your challenges?
Yeah, I think I touched on that earlier in terms of the challenges that led to the premature retirements in the last decade and the need for some sort of policy support when you had declining power prices. So I think that's more of a question for the new development and where you come up with the capital stack to put together the financing that you need over that period of time. It's just so different from other technologies where a year and a half or so you got power shooting out of the other end. Here, it is a long design approval, construction cycle. But on the back end, you get 80 years of power, right? And it's just so getting everyone's mind around what that means to finance something like that in a wholesale market. I think Chris did a good job of laying out the potential solutions. And I think the job for all of us in this room is just to sort of lean in and work together on how to make that happen, because it is a solvable problem. It's a big problem, but it is solvable, I think.
And perhaps going back to Clay, so you were alluding to the fact that some of these large energy users have a very different way of valuing nuclear. What is different about them?
Well, the hyperscalers are playing for a massive prize. And the only constraint on their ability to achieve that prize is largely power. It's not land, it's not data pipes, it's not chips, it's power. And when you're playing for a huge prize, not a 10.5% regulated rate of return, but a huge prize, that motivates you to think about risk in a completely different way. That's why it is my view that the next generation of build-out, it'll be a very important role for the utilities to play. We have a great partnership with Energy Northwest in Washington State. But the utilities have not committed risk capital into the construction of new nuclear plants, any, in the United States since Plant Vogtle and VC Summer went down. Nothing. And who has committed risk capital? Dow Chemical, Amazon. And they, because they have a different risk return calculus. And so I think we need to embrace that and lean into it. And to the point that was just made, one of the ways to help the economics on nuclear is to have a market design that recognizes the value of nuclear. We have, in my judgment, failed market designs in most jurisdictions here in the United States. And those are largely under the jurisdiction of state public utility commissions. But when you prioritize non-dispatchable, variable, renewable power into the grid, and the result of that is you are taking nuclear offline, that is a failed market design. And that is, quite frankly, I think a big reason why Constellation had to shut in some of their plants over the last 10 to 15 years. So there are policy things that we should do in terms of market design that allow nuclear to be compensated for the full benefits that it's bringing to a market.
Yeah.
So you seem passionate about that stuff.
You and I have talked about this, and certainly this is one of the areas where we are doing quite a lot of work, working at a global level with energy regulators. So yes, it's very important to figure out what is the financial framework, but it's just as important for the financiers to understand what is the revenue model. And as Clay is saying, our markets, we all agree that competitive markets are very good, but these competitive markets need to recognize all the features of all the technologies. So you need to figure out what is the value of 24/7 generation, of spinning reserves, of stability, of frequency, of inertia, of reliability, resiliency. So right now, we don't assign any value to any of those things, and the markets that we have, they only give us a signal to what is going to be dispatched tomorrow. There is no signals to invest on generation, on transmission, on distribution, or anything. So those signals need to be put back in the market in order to be able to have a truly competitive market that, in fact, does provide electricity that is affordable for everybody, stable, and also actually provides the price that is due to that electricity.
Thank you. Perhaps just to finish, we've got 1 minute left. I'm going to ask each one of you a difficult question, which is, what is the biggest challenge, the one thing that if you unlock, you get the full, basically, benefits of nuclear? Is it rather the market, which is going to drive the order book, or is it the supply chain, and the other way around? Kathleen, what do you think?
For me, it's long-term offtake. I take all the points about wholesale market design. We've spent an enormous amount of time trying to address those questions, but I'm not sure a short-term market is going to provide the long-term price signal to bring, to keep existing reactors on the grid or to bring new ones on. So I think that's why it's important to think about potential for long-term hedging, both with utilities and then with corporate off-takers. I mean, I think that is going to be essential to making sure we can keep doing what we do for America.
Sama?
Yeah, no, so I think we've seen a lot of progress in policy, finance. So to me, the thing that we are working right now is to make sure that we are supporting the industry to truly deliver. So, you know, upscaling and rebuilding our capabilities, whether it's supply chain, whether it is workforce, working with our regulators to accelerate and streamline the way we approve and license these plants. So I think I'm focusing my efforts on what we, the industry, with our sector can do to make this happen.
So continuing, Clay?
The most important thing is for us to execute well. Chris and I are living in an amazing environment. Tremendous policy support, great customers, readiness in the capital markets. But now we have to deliver projects on time, on budget, meeting our customers' performance expectations at a high quality and safely. Mm-hmm. If we do that, both Chris and I will sell as many plants as we could dream of.
Exactly.
And if we don't, we screwed it up for another generation.
No pressure.
Have to agree with Clay.
Don't blow it.
The market demand is there, right? People are waiting and watching. They love existing nuclear. They want to do PPAs. They want to restart plants that could still be restarted, of which there's probably only 3 or 4. The only way to address this hesitancy about new builds is for us to plow through those milestones, to get the regulatory approvals, to break ground, and to form great partnerships, that can not just help us deliver the first plants on time, but show that there can be many, many reactors per year delivered.
Yep.
Well, thank you to my speakers. We learned a lot about nuclear, a lot of buzz. I hope next year we'll talk about actual on-site ground progress. Looking forward to that. In the meantime, thanks to the audience. And just a quick point, the next session is going to be about low-carbon power for AI, so I guess we could actually stay here.
Yeah, exactly.
We're asked to leave. So thanks to my speakers.
Thanks, Sylvain. Thank you.